Hi and welcome to Fuse Interviews, where we show you the best EV conversions and electric vehicles have to offer in the region. Today I have somebody super special on my show. This is Mr. Mohamed Musleh. He is the program manager for the automotive engineering division here at Herriott Watt, and he also teaches here. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, Salman. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I totally appreciate the chance to interview a man such as yourself. So tell me, Mr. Mohammed, can you get into a little bit more detail about what you do here?
Well, first of all, I'm an assistant professor here. I teach programs ranging from electrical, mechanical, and automotive engineering. But my passion is always cars. So if it has wheels, if it moves, I'm into it.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, where you grew up, how you came to Dubai?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Iraq. I have been here for the last about 15 years or so, quite some time. I think my childhood and roots actually have some touches into what I am today. I grew up with my father's workshop, and he used to be building different stuff, electronics and others. He got actually some patents back in the 70s. He was very active into the early start of electronics.
Nice.
So, you know, I found myself with wires, soldering irons, basic electronics, where I put things together, and then I think this is still going on. So yeah, cars was always a passion for me. When I started with cars, it was really that very simple modifications back in the day. We all had that manual glass windows, for example. I tried to make it automated.
That's awesome.
Add the switches, add gauges, try to know more about what's happening under the hood rather than just, you know, have the car as something to get you from A to B. So yeah, I think that developed, and I am what I am today.
That's awesome. Such a great story, right? The thing is, and I know this about you, right? You're a bit of a legend when it comes to the EV space. I mean, you had, let's be honest, one of the first conversions in the region, probably in the world. But it sounds really awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you back in the day to do this, and what was it?
Well, yeah, I think it was quite an early one here in the UAE and the region. I am into classic cars. So I have been restoring and driving classic cars for a while. And then I came across a very special kit car, Sebring Turbo. There's a very limited number of them. It's
now an infamous, I must say, kit car, because of what you did to it. Mr. Musleh has been featured in Motoring Middle East and many other publications back in the day. Yeah. So yeah, please do tell us, do continue.
So yeah, I was thinking of, you know, and I had that alternative fuel thing in my mind for a while. Is it natural gas, converting an internal combustion engine to run on natural gas, compressed gas? Is it electric? Is it something else? I have been into multiple routes. Electricity, and it comes as a good option. And to be frank, it's not that new. There are some facts that we really need to keep in mind. Electric machines and even electric cars were on the road before internal combustion engine cars, more than 100 years ago.
That's right. Wow, that's amazing. That's great to know. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what were the first cars that were built?
Well, see, now, I think just before the cars, it's really related to the energy resources we had. We had used horses and horse carriages for a really long period. Then as we as a human start to get access to, let's say, more condensed energy source, that at that time was coal, and then we could burn it, and then we had the steam engine. And that energy, human was trying to fit it in everywhere. Industry, of course, almost. But then mobility come to that. Concepts and the basic of electromagnetism and how to have a motor turns using electricity, that was something that we as a human, again, mastered it. As generators start to generate to supply electricity to different things, and then very basic batteries come into the picture, then the immediate next application was, you know, let's get the horses out of these carriages and get them propelled by electric motors. And with electric motors, limited number of moving parts, And that happened, if I remember correctly, somewhere around the 1885. And that came slightly before where we have mastered, or at least came up with the first internal combustion engine and having more of a liquid fuel that we can store and move in. And as that start, again, it took some years to get engines we know today, although the basics and the cycles and the thermodynamics behind that are very similar. Now, at that point of time, probably my and your grandfather, they had the option to drive electric car, steam-powered car, or internal combustion engine car. And steam, sometimes you refer to external combustion. Now, all these manufacturers, small manufacturers, it could be brothers, families, and small businesses, they develop different cars and then they sell them, compete with each other. And each one of them has its own advantages and disadvantages. Electricity was quiet, was limited in range, but you know, it was not a big deal because cities and towns was not that big anyway.
That's right, yeah.
And the roads was not that paved all over the place and so on. It was a good choice if you don't want to get your hands dirty with all the other options, steam, and then firing up the steam, wait until it primes up, and then get the car running, carry up with your water and of course your energy source. Internal combustion engine, as they start, they were cranked by hand. I'm sure you have seen all these movies.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
And that was not a very easy job.
I can imagine not, yeah.
Imagine that is linked with the, you know, all the school carburetor, and sometimes even now with the classic cars, with the electric starter, you start the car and then you'll have to add the fuel or do things. Imagine if you have to do all that work.
I can imagine.
It was not fun.
Not fun, yeah.
Now, what killed all the other options and got the internal combustion cars forward is the electric starter, the very compact starter motor. So electric motor, just a smaller compact one, is what killed the early electric cars, because then you'll have a high density fuel, a store that can take you for a greater trips, and you can scale that engine into different number of cylinders. It started easily. And you know, as cars there on the road network start to expand. That was almost the only solution, but we had hybrid cars, we had electric cars, trials of them all over that 100 years until we reached here.
Well, I mean, the way we are here now, as we know now, is unsustainable. And so all of these, we have a resurgence of electric cars, we have a resurgence in conversions, we have a resurgence. Was that the inspiration that brought you to the first conversion that you did?
Well, as I mentioned, I was looking to try something new. Even when I select my classic cars project, I choose things which are not very common. So that was very attractive to me. It's a new field. Being in Dubai was a great advantage because here you can sort of get everything from across the world. I know there are challenges with shipping, communications, and so on, but being here, that helps a lot. So I decided, you know what, I want to make that electric car happen here. From, you know, a technical background, engineering, we really sometimes focus on get the things done. I want to drive electric car, but certainly no commercial or business thinking. I got that Sebring Turbo, and then I start to source components for it, and was used components from the US. Most of it, ship it over, put it together, and then try different things. As you would expect, the batteries were the main challenge. Was what batteries, good batteries comes with a good cost and will need a good investment. So I have been trying with different batteries. I started with the first set of a used lithium ion, early lithium ion, more of a pouch. Tried with some lead acid. Then that was really the story. I managed to register the car, so it was fully road legal. I probably was the only person in Dubai that I have to hang a cable from the balcony to get to the car to charge it.
Early charging
when I'm at home. And I literally knew that every place I go where there is a free plug that I can, you know, top up while I'm charging, Dubai Mall, different malls, different areas that I commonly go, I know where is the plug and where I'm allowed to connect to that plug to get a top-up, because my capacity on the battery was not that great, so it's always good to have a little bit
That's
top-up.
right. And this was, we have to say, this is pre-Diva giving the EV chargers away. So I think you were pretty much charging from a 3-pin plug. Is that what it was?
Yeah. I had onboard charger with a normal 3-pin plug, and I took the cars to all sort of shows, meets up, and always I was making jokes about that.
You'd also find the plug everywhere.
Found the plug, and every time somebody asked me, how do you charge that vehicle? I tell them, I plug my mobile on this side and my car on this side and just
That's
sleep
a great
overnight.
Story.
Yeah.
That is a great story. So what kind of onboard charger did you have?
Well, on that time, I decided to go with a 72-volt system because it was, the limit to safety.
Right.
I wanted that first car to be really something that I show to people. And that's why you probably have seen the pictures and all the interviews and so on. So I was welcoming people to see, check the system out. I don't need to worry about them touching something or, breaking something off. I don't mind. I build it, I can fix it. Unlike, you'll just need it to be covered and then have ropes around it. This is not the concept which I was trying to do. So 72 was the limit to safety. So I went with a 72 volt system, and in most of the cases I had a 100 ampere hour main battery, and I always had a standby battery to give me very short range. Just in case I stop somewhere, I should not be stopping there, just to push it a little bit further to safety, if you wish. Although this is probably something which we need to talk about, because often when this electric cars concept comes, everybody worried about the range, and they think that the electric car will stop midway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we get a gauge for the battery, so we know exactly when the car is going to stop.
Sure, yeah. It's the same way you get a fuel gauge.
Exactly.
No yeah.
So if you are driving a normal car and if you don't refuel it on time, it will stop on the way.
It's the same way.
Yeah.
Exactly the same way.
So yeah, the onboard charger was a 72 volt smart charger, and this type of charger will give a different type of voltage and current over time. So it will rapidly charge at the beginning and then start to reduce the charging until they're having the battery floating at a certain voltage, which is maintaining the health of the battery, but also give me a quick charge up in the very first portion of time.
It sounds like even back in the day, you had a system where you were keeping a buffer on the top end and you were keeping a buffer at the bottom end of the battery. That's phenomenal. And this is back in 2012, mind you.
Yeah.
When the Tesla had just come out in production, and you were doing this all by yourself, which is amazing, which is absolutely stunning. When you use a 3-pin plug, what kind of power were you getting off that plug every hour?
I have never, measured that in practicality, because I was not worried about, let's say, the bills, the commercial aspects, but I was always limiting it to the safety factors. So these 13 amp plugs are rated at 13 amp.
That's right.
I always keep the setting on that charger to drop below 10, just to make sure that I don't damage anybody's plug. Will be all safe and comparable to anything that you would have at home.
That's funny, because that's something that now a lot of Tesla owners relate to as well, because they get the Schuko plug and they get the 3-pin plug, and that's the same amount of limit that you get on the Tesla when you plug one of those into the UMC. So it's very, very similar. The same conversation that we're having now, almost 9 years later.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, people know have more widespread knowledge of this because there's so many electric cars being sold. But you knew this, back in the day, which is amazing.
Well, this is the the good part about science. These concepts never change. So the current, the flow of current, and then your capacity, these all the same. What is now pushing all this forward is really the demand. Automotive industry was always demand-led. You will always look back in the history and you see great concept cars, but they never made it to production for a reason. Now the demand on electric cars or even hybrids, or let's say low emissions in general, is pushing that all forward through innovation. I mean, even when we talk about today's electric cars, they have pushed the motor technology that we knew for about a century forward to get advantages from different types of motors in one, and then going forward and package it in a package that reduce the size, reduce the weight, and give more space to the passengers and the driver from legroom point of view, luggage point of view.
That's something that most people don't talk about. Most people talk about the batteries and the fact that they're getting cheaper and more energy dense. Motors have come such a long way from when we used to know them. I mean, we used to know these older motors that are used for industrial units. If you see these Tesla motors and the motors in electric cars now, they are absolutely tiny, right? And they are very, very power dense for what they provide. They beat down ICE engines handily.
Yeah, well, they certainly do, and I think development is yet to come. Motors is not the only bit that was developing the control schemes. The controllers are now coming really sophisticated and making use of everything possible on the parameters, looking at frequency, voltage, current for that second of the driver and the car needs. So is it performance, is it economy, keeping the battery life, or really other factors? The cars is not about propulsion only. Passengers will require comfort, will require additional system to work around that, and that need to be all supplied within that main energy planet within the car, if we want to call it that way, whether it's electric, whether it's powered by any other fuel.
That's right. I mean, that's something quite interesting that I find when it comes to designing for electric vehicles, is that the more of these comforts you give, the more energy that the car takes. But then the more energy the car takes, the bigger the battery, the more the weight, and then you need to add more battery to be able to compensate for the weight. So it's a bit of a balance that they have to play when it comes to these things. This is the world that we live in, where all of these technologies are now making their way step by step by step, and I find it really awesome.
That's true. Automotive engineering is always about a compromise. What you want to sacrifice to get something better, and that is how you get with the right combination for that specific application. Even with the petrol powered cars, that is the case, where sometimes if you want better aerodynamics, you lose other stuff. If you want better space, you lose other things, and so on. Absolutely.
Just the way that the development works and now has progressed, especially for electric vehicles, is amazing. I want to move on to the next part. I know you did the Sebring, and I know you did like amazingly well back then. But then coming up right after, I know you followed it up with a bunch of other conversions as well. Would you like to speak about that and how those came about?
When you are acquiring a new skill, as you get to know what you are doing, the next part of the chain comes really easy. When you first get into that and you want to know your range, what is the effect of the battery voltage, what's the effect of the current, these tricky bits, as you get hold of them, then the rest will be matter of really getting the planet out and putting something in. I was doing conversions because again, I like certain type of cars that I would like to drive on daily basis, or sometimes really as a second car. And I just wanted to get that electricity mobility or e-mobility with me as I go to different cars. So yeah, I have worked on a Volkswagen Beetle, early Beetle in 1965, which again, it was that concept, showing off the system and then letting people ask a question and try to answer, I would say, the correct answer. Unfortunately, until now, after that long time, you go on the internet and you think that there are two sides. It's just one side and then the other side, and highlighting the problems, but not looking into the future and how all this fit, and what does it mean to accelerate the innovation in this field at this stage for us and for our mobility for years to come.
Absolutely, like I see that as well. And the thing is, the future of electric vehicles now I think is being taken up by a lot of companies seriously, and even I would say up to 2 to 3 years ago it was not. So it's very, very good to see. But having that, the fact that there is a lot of negative talk about electric cars, but now that the main manufacturers, the major OEMs, Volkswagen is committing, Audi's come out with two electric cars, even the UAE. What do you think is the future of electric vehicles in the UAE and also globally?
Well, see, I think electric drivetrain and electric propulsion is having a big share in the future. Now, how we store that electricity or whether we generate it on board, that is a different story. So I think breakthrough in battery system is going to be the result of all that demand. And we are hearing about downsizing the batteries and coming out with packages, having alternatives way to deal with batteries. For example, you are hearing about concept where you can rent a battery.
Yeah.
So you don't have to buy it off the
true.
car. And then this kind of concept, although of course will have lots of challenges from a standardization point of view and so on, but this kind of concept will reduce the price significantly. This is what many people care about.
Of course, yeah, the price. At the end of the day, if it's cheaper to run this car, they're going to run it.
Exactly. And the second thing is for those who are focusing on the battery manufacturer and blaming it for the high CO2 emissions is going to sort of being smaller and smaller of a problem, because the battery owner is an entity that is going to keep circulating them and recycling them later. Recycling schemes will certainly be better over time as you have more batteries, and that is a field it's developing at the moment. I won't say that this is at the top. Hydrogen as a fuel and then generating electricity on board is being offered as option. It has on its challenges as well, and that might develop in parallel. But I think electric propulsion certainly has a key part of the future. Probably in a very short period of time, you will see majority of the manufacturers going with hybrids to start with, that have the first step of the electric propulsion to fit all markets, and then that will seems to get bigger. The internal combustion will get smaller. So not smaller means you have tiny engine, tiny but powerful engine, and this is what you actually need, rather than having the huge engines and then you look at their output, which is really minimal.
I think we covered so much, and I really appreciate that whole journey that you gave into electric mobility. And I think somebody like you would really only know the entire journey, what's been happening, and how that personally relates to what you've been doing and stuff. Can I ask, what's next for you?
Well, I think I'm keep doing experiments with alternative fuels. Electric mobility is certainly that in the list. So probably another conversion, and
we cannot wait to hear about that.
Thank you. You will get to hear about that, probably the first one. Going into that route. Other than this, what I do is mostly as a hobby. There is also part of it as my research and interest, being in the academia, and I'm working on research with students, postgraduate students as well, on these fields, focusing on the UAE and this area challenges, because here we have got really challenges when it comes to e-mobility. The weather from one side, fuel prices of course, and the availability of different fuels, then the public requirements within the UAE. For example, there is a good culture of off-roading, which is certainly good, and then how you will fit e-mobility in there, to know more about them, and hopefully to think about the solutions that will fit best.
That's amazing. I mean, I think a couple of those points that you hit on really hit home for me, because yes, unlike almost every other market right now in this region, we have probably the highest temperatures, and apart from, let's say, Arizona or somewhere in the US that is like that. Most people have it the other way, where it's too cold to run the EV. And the other thing, like you mentioned, is off-roading. People are huge on off-roading here, and that is a very, very different conversation to basically running out city cars. So going forward, those challenges will be very interesting to address, especially in the UAE market.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate having you talk about all of this stuff. We hope to see you soon. If you need any more details from Mr. Mohamed Musleh and what he does, I will put a link in the description of the video. You feel free to reach out to him, and see you in the next one. Thank you.